multilateral development banks. They have access to financial resources and mechanisms that enable the longer-term responses that are necessary to adaptation. At ICRC, we are familiar with the realities of operating in unstable settings. We work closely with communities and we witness firsthand the risks they face due to conflict, violence, and due to climate change. We can share what we know, and in all the projects that manage to reinforce the resilience of communities, they all share common features. They are context-specific, they are sensitive to the local realities, they are conflict-sensitive, and aim to tackle the root causes of people vulnerability, and they are provided in partnership with local authorities, with local communities, with service providers, such as municipal water providers and agriculture ministries. But there are still major gaps. We need to do more, and it's about where these responses are implemented. It's about their depth, breadth, and timescale. And doing better is possible. We need to do more, we need to do better, we need to do faster, and it needs to start now. Thank you.
Thank you. Director General Mardini, through you, I think many of us express deep appreciation for the frontline work precisely on the issue of climate, peace and security that the ICRC in the context of the movement is advancing. I will increase my volunteer hours as Red Crescent for my own mission. Please forgive me. Join me again in thanking our distinguished panel. The announcements of contributions to the package of solutions continue as we welcome to the stage further distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. As we welcome further colleagues to announce their package of solutions, and as colleagues will exit the stage.
My brother. Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. So we come to the stage now, the next set of announcements by Ms. Jennifer Morgan, the State Secretary and Climate Envoy for the International Climate Action of Germany, if you would. And I would encourage colleagues to take their seats if they can. Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator of UNDP, if you would. Ms. Sarah Charles, Assistant Administrator of USAID. I believe we are also welcoming the Executive Director of the United Nations Environmental Programme, excellent. Ms. Joyce Musuya, Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Mr. Mikko Ollikainen, Head of Adaptation Fund. You are most welcome, and if I could encourage all to take their seats as we hear the last set of contributions. We're going to have a challenge. I see more coming on. Colleagues, if I could encourage you to take your seats, it's causing a bit of a distraction. We have already Mr. Jagan Chapagan, CEO and Secretary General of IFRC, and Dr. Comfort Arrow, President and CEO of the International Crisis Group. Please take your seats, dear colleagues. Protocol, if you could kindly assist with encouraging all to take their seats, I'd be grateful to you, because so with that, and I trust we will honor those who are still making the commitments, Ms. Jennifer Morgan, State Secretary and Climate Envoy for International Climate Action of Germany. Good to see you, Madam. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and it's great to be part of this day. It's an important time to be bringing peace and climate stability together. I'm going to try and get my mic. Thank you, Achim. Vielen Dank. I just want to also thank the UAE presidency and its leadership for bringing together climate, peace, recovery and relief. I think the declaration sends a very strong signal, and We very much stand with the countries and the communities that are most severely affected by the climate crisis, while at the same time being threatened by fragility or conflict. And I think this is an opportunity to bring these different, if I may say, worlds that are so really connected together. And that's very important because those people are tremendously confronted with humanitarian needs. So I think this broad support base that we're seeing, it really shows the potential and the spirit to increase our support for people at the front line of climate change and instability. And we were glad to be able to substantially advance this important declaration through our Climate for Peace network. Germany supports and commits to the declaration. And I think on the big picture of things, and then I'll go into the specifics here today, I mean, the launch and the decision on the loss and damage fund here on day one was a very big priority for Germany and for the European Union. And our matching grant with the United Arab Emirates of 100 million each has now catalyzed over 600 million euros for the loss and damage fund. We know that's just to get it up and running. And, you know, our humanitarian work that we do, also really having the anticipatory approach for humanitarian help is very important as well. And we will remain committed to that and hopefully should remain second largest donor on that. But I think I wanted to bring some additional pieces which are around the new and innovative and specific approaches here. And I think we need to be very much more gender sensitive and be more inclusive in our approaches. And so just this morning, Germany launched a new Women and Climate Security Funding Initiative together with our partner, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. Our seed funding of 3 million euros provides support for grassroots and for local women's organizations and communities at the forefront of preventing and responding to climate-related conflicts. And we have a couple of projects that are starting in Colombia and in the Pacific, in Fiji, Solomon Islands, Tonga, and Vanuatu. And we combine, and this is kind of bringing these communities together, the peace building and climate action to increase women's leadership in conflict and crisis contexts. And it also, this funding really fosters women's participation in decision-making processes and women's leadership in peace negotiations and socioeconomic recovery efforts. So very important to have that diversity and that inclusion. Secondly, we're happy to announce another group commitment together with partner countries, members of the Climate for Peace Initiative, present here today, supporting the unique role and work by the Climate Security Mechanism. The CSM has mainstreamed climate and security within the UN and developed more holistic approaches to address the multiple challenges of human security and climate change. We have climate and security advisors in South Sudan, in Iraq, in the Horn of Africa, in Central Africa, in the West Africa and the Sahel. Climate and security advisors have worked in the missions and local stakeholders, providing those specific trainings on climate security and actually, again, bringing strategies and innovative strategies together. So we're triple our financial support for the CSM, providing €3 million a year plus a junior professional officer in 2024. But I just want to end by saying we know that the most important, or along with all of this, we have to phase out fossil fuels, build up renewables, and have emissions in just about 6 years. That is one of the key pieces. And we need to get funding into the Adaptation Fund and to resilience, often the forgotten piece. Thank you.
Thank you, State Secretary Morgan. We now turn to Ms. Rothensteiner, Minister of UNDP, if you would, sir.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to join the previous panels and this panel. And listening to all of you, I reflected that in the work of the United Nations generally, but also particularly in that organization that I lead, the United Nations Development Programme, much of what we have touched on here this morning, and that is reflected in the declaration, is our daily reality. And it begins sometimes on the back of tragedy, of failure to prevent. And that is particularly where the interface between humanitarians and development and also the political organizations very much is part of the solution. But more often than not, in this day and age, we should be focusing on prevention and the ability to actually not end up in a situation where we have so many countries exposed to fragility, to be crisis countries. And again, UNDP works in virtually every fragile and crisis-affected country across the developing world today. It is part of the reality with which we try to both help people recover, find the development pathway out of crisis, recognizing that climate resilience and adaptation are fundamental building blocks of rebuilding livelihoods, but also long-term strategies. The climate security mechanism, Jennifer, that you just referred to, together with UNEP, UNDP and DPPA, our Department of Political Affairs, is another form in which we have tried to bring these different threads together, sometimes at the global level also, because policy making matters, recognition by leaders matters of these integral pieces that we need to deliver. As the largest climate implementing and also often in terms of peace and recovery implementing entity in the UN family, we have a very significant portfolio, and as of this very moment, over $450 million are being invested, particularly in fragile and crisis countries, in order to address climate vulnerability and, more importantly, how to make development more resilient. So, in coming today to this meeting, I want to also recognize the United Arab Emirates. I think it is an important signal to send. It is certainly a reality that many on the ground and on the front lines of climate change have been living for many years already. Thank you very much, and thank you also for the support that Germany just offered to the climate security mechanism. I think it is seeding these initiatives that will help us to move from analysis, recognition, and rhetoric to action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Please join. We now turn to Ms. Inger Andersen, Executive Director, United Nations Environmental Programme. Please, if you would, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and I will echo what Akim said, and essentially also very much thank all the supporters to the climate security mechanism, Norway mentioned before, and now Germany and many others. But I also want to salute our friends at the UAE for really putting this for the first time at a COP agenda. We, from the United Nations Environment Programme, we are acutely aware, and we start from the western side of the Sahel, and you go all the way to Afghanistan and across, and you see that where climate is giving people punches, too much water, too little water, insecure around harvest, etc. Yes, there are other aspects, politics, ethnicity, religion, etc., that are driving conflict, but as you peel the layer of this onion, there is always climate. And so the reality is, as we heard from Executive Secretary Wagner Gebeyev from IGAD, that these countries are taking hard hits. We from UNEP are privileged to be based in Kenya, and we have gone through 4 years of extreme drought. In the northern part of Kenya, we meaning Kenya, lost 1.5 million heads of cattle. And you might say, well, yeah, okay, that happened. Well, when cattle are lost, then, of course, families go poor. And so before this crisis, there was 1.5 million kids in school feeding. After the crisis, there are 4 million kids in school feeding. Now, is that climate justice? Will that be eligible under the Loss and Damage Fund? These are the kind of conversations that are hard. Similarly, we need to consider the debt distress of many of these countries. They've taken out loans to build roads and infrastructure. The infrastructure is washed away. The loans are not washed away. What does climate justice look like in that regard? And that is what pulls the rug under the structures of the state to enable the state to begin to build so that you can have strength in the state and avoid insecurity. I have, and I know that Joyce Musuya will mention some of this, she is the deputy of OCHA, but visited Pakistan, visited Malawi, etc., and seen the impacts of climate and how this is happening now when we are living at 1.1 degrees increase. But right now, as our emissions gap report shows us, we are, based on the NDCs, heading to a 2.9 degree world in 2100. If we add the conditional NDCs, we're heading to a 2.5 degree world. None of these are acceptable, which is why stepping up on decarbonization is the only way to go. But in the meanwhile, These folks in these countries are suffering and suffering greatly. Yes, we have mechanisms, but they're woefully inadequate, and stepping up and understanding, as we heard the Commissioner speak to, that insecurity, climate disasters often go very much hand in hand. And insecurity is a thing that we should all be deeply concerned about. So we from UNEP, like UNDP, have worked on this for a decade. We do much of the analysis. We work together with those that have the boots on the ground, and we come in with the environmental analysis and support countries. But there's a long way to journey. This declaration is a very important first step, but we have to put now action behind the declaration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We now turn to Assistant Secretary General Joyce Msuya, UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Itonde. First, I want to thank the UAE as COP President for driving this declaration. And I thank all those who have collaborated on and endorsed the declaration. It is timely and relevant. The humanitarian impacts of climate change are already with us, and they're devastating. In the last 20 years, we have seen a staggering 800% increase in climate-related needs in humanitarian appeals. In many cases, climate change is overtaking other factors as the predominant driver of humanitarian need. The effects are hitting, sadly, the most vulnerable countries and communities, worst and longest, countries that have often contributed the least to climate change. And they're hitting countries often riven by years of conflict, economic strife, and underdevelopment. The declaration says all of the right things about closing the climate finance gap for fragile and conflict-affected countries. But the most important thing now, as articulated by others, is to take concrete steps to put these words into action. The humanitarian system cannot be a solution to climate change, but we are committed to playing our part. We are endorsing the declaration, and we will contribute to the package of solutions in 3 ways. First, we will use the UN Central Emergency Response Fund to channel more support to communities affected by climate-related disasters. Second, OCHA will facilitate mainstream and scale up collective anticipatory action. We will use the OCHA-managed pool funds to pre-arrange finance for collective anticipatory action, including a guiding figure of investing 10% of CEF's annual spending on anticipatory action. Third, we will deepen our coordination with partners on the ground to reach across our humanitarian, development, and climate silos and make sure that communities affected by climate disasters get all the support they need to recover, adapt, and build resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Secretary General. We now turn to the Assistant Administrator, Sarah Charles of USAID. The floor is yours.
I want to echo thanks of others to the United Arab Emirates for using their leadership of the COP28 presidency to bring us together on this important occasion, and a special thanks for elevating relief, recovery, and peace and climate change for the first time at a global climate conference. This elevation matters today, but even more so after we leave this conference. The United States is honored to join the COP28 Declaration on Climate, Relief, Recovery, and Peace, on which we work tirelessly with many of you. We've already heard from Joyce so eloquently about the reasons why this declaration matters. So I want to highlight a couple of examples of how the United States is supporting solutions. First, through the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or PREPARE, the United States is aiming to support more than 500 million people to adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change by 2030. And we're making sure that the needs and expertise of vulnerable communities who are experiencing instability or conflict are key to that work. Second, the U.S. is investing over $50 million in implementation of early warning systems, essential tools that we know save lives and assets. USAID and the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, are working with the World Meteorological Organization, UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and National Meteorological and Hydrological Services in 20 African nations, small island developing states, and least developed countries to establish and advance early warning systems on floods, droughts, cyclones, and heat waves. But even as we strengthen our investment in early warning and adaptation capacity, we must also be working to swiftly deliver response and relief for those communities that are already bearing the brunt of climate insecurity. As the largest humanitarian donor, the United States government provided nearly $15 billion in life-saving humanitarian assistance this year. That includes responding to climate disasters. And we're working to transform humanitarian response and scale up anticipatory approaches to get ahead of climate-related disasters, including by expanding the use of pooled funding that supports early action and anticipatory action. For example, we contribute to the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, or CERF, for rapid response to climate disasters, ensuring funds can quickly reach those in need when disaster strikes. And we also support IFRC's Disaster Response Emergency Fund, or the DREF, with increased support in recent years, another effective mechanism to quickly and directly fund local humanitarian actors and support acting ahead of disasters. In addition, we're supporting the creation of the Secretariat for the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations to scale and adapt specifically locally led humanitarian action in the face of rising climate disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now turn to Mr. Mikko Ollikainen, head of the Adaptation Fund. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to speak at this launch event as part of the launch of the declaration and to convey our endorsement of the declaration. For the Adaptation Fund, building a resilience for the most vulnerable communities is the core principle of our mandate. Over the last 15 years, we've invested over $1 billion for 160 innovative and localized climate adaptation projects in the most vulnerable communities of developing countries around the world. Close to 50% of those are in least developed countries and small island developing states. As outlined by the 6th assessment report of the IPCC and to the COP28 thematic area of recovery and peace, many of the communities facing the adverse impacts of climate change are located in highly vulnerable countries, particularly those threatened or affected by fragility or conflict, or facing severe humanitarian needs. The IPCC report highlights the urgency of adaptation action to address compounding risks faced by vulnerable populations living in regions susceptible to both climate shocks and enduring conflict. Yet they receive disproportionately low levels of investment despite the potential for high returns in terms of human development and stability. This COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace is fully aligned with the Adaptation Fund mandate to promote resilience and help communities to further access climate finance for adaptation in all eligible countries, including in fragile and conflict-affected environments. Many of the projects we support are implemented in countries with highly vulnerable communities, particularly those threatened or affected by fragility or conflict, or facing severe humanitarian needs. We remain committed to further expand our support to countries which are facing multidimensional vulnerability in their fight against climate change, including building capacity for long-term resilience. Many of the proposed objectives and actions in the declaration are already part of our operational modalities, and we stand ready to further scale up our support under our new medium-term strategy. For example, through our enhanced direct access window and expanded windows on locally led adaptation slated to be operationalized next year, we will enhance local ownership and participation, empowering communities to implement climate adaptation projects tailored to their specific needs. Addressing climate change issues needs to be inclusive. We stand ready to collaborate with partners in this room to address the compounding risks faced by vulnerable populations in countries experiencing both climate shocks and enduring conflicts and fragility. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We turn to Mr. Jagan Chapagan, Secretary General of IFRC. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tunde, colleagues and friends. Of course, we fully endorse and support the declaration. And here I would like to say maybe one proposal and three solutions. The proposal is that, when you talk about humanitarian development, climate relief, recovery, or peace, the convergence point is the local communities, the people who live in the communities. So my proposal here is that let's put the local leadership and local action at the center. Community leadership and community action at the center. That's how the peace gets built. Now, from the IFRC point of view, three solutions I want to share with you is, number of colleagues talked about our disaster response emergency fund. We have committed to spend at least 25% of that fund on anticipated action to make sure that the relief and recovery can happen as rapidly as possible, because that's extremely important in saving lives and livelihoods. The second, and very important, and I want to build on what my friend Akim already said, would it not have been better if we had invested 30, 40 years ago to minimize or avoid the current fragility and conflict? Now, at the moment, we are focusing on fragility and conflict, but by ignoring that investment in 30, 40 years, we may be contributing to create new fragility and conflict. So it's extremely important that investing in resilience building, in development, to ensure that we minimize and avoid the fragility would be extremely important. Here, from the IFRC, we have established what we call the Global Climate Resilience Platform. We aim to invest $1 billion in next five years in climate-affected communities to build that resilience. The resilience communities minimizes the chances of fragility and minimizes the conflict. That's the contribution we want to make. The third one, and which I think we have been talking about a lot during this conference, has been ensuring that there is an early warning for all. That early warning is backed up by financing so that the early action can be taken. And by doing that, you again contribute in building the resilience, and by doing that, reduce the fragility, and by doing that, you contribute in building the peace. These are the proposals and solutions I want to put on the table on behalf of the IFRC. Thank you. Back to you, Tony.
Thank you, Secretary General. I now turn to Dr. Comfort Arrow, President and CEO of the International Crisis Group. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tunde, and I really want to just endorse what you've just said. Also, given what you've just said about investment, congratulations to the UAE for making this the very first COP where we've got an explicit discussion on peace, recovery, and as you said, resilience as well. So real congratulations, and I see it, quite frankly, as a pivotal moment in the discussion on climate discourse going forward. And I hope that we're able to sustain this Peace Day so that we can have many more Peace Days, and that we're seeing serious investment towards that. Of course, Itunde Crisis Group supports the declaration. This is why we're here. And we have a specific tool that we are already using that will follow on to support the package of solutions that the declaration already enforces. That is an initiative that we are calling eArth. It's an environmental early action risk tracking hub. We're marrying what Crisis Group does best, political analysis, early warning, and bringing the climate science to help inform the decisions that decision makers have to make. We are doing this specifically in the Horn of Africa, which we see as a microcosm of all the key challenges that many people have been talking about today. Why the Horn? Because it is the place where we've seen severe weather events coincide with real destructive conflicts. We're looking specifically at South Sudan and Somalia. You'd have heard already from the Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia when he talked about the droughts, the insurgents exploding, colliding in a tsunami of crises already in Somalia. The aim of EF Itunde is to bridge the gap between climate analysis and crisis prevention, sounding the alarm, reaching affected populations, as you quite rightly highlighted, and making sure that all decision makers get the information faster in a very clear and targeted way. Our aim, Itunde, is first to ensure that we help decision makers understand the linkages between climate and conflict. Secondly, to make sure that money is allocated in the right areas where there's a great climate spillover. And thirdly, to make sure that what we do speaks directly to the realities on the ground. That is our commitment to the declaration, our commitment to everybody that is standing behind the notion of peace, resilience and recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Colleagues, mindful of all the commitments that have been given and the pressing needs and ongoing negotiations underway, I'm going to break protocol slightly and invite Mr. David Miliband, President and CEO, International Rescue Committee, to the stage. Ms. Nimo Hassan, Director, NGO Consortium Somalia, to the stage. Please, if you would come forward. And as you're coming forward, I'm going to say the following. In my capacity as President of Interpeace, we firmly endorse the declaration and believe that implementation of the Paris Agreement will only be possible if climate action is conflict sensitive, as my distinguished colleague just indicated. And to this end, we offer as a tangible contribution to the package of solutions a partnership with CGIAR, Focus Climate Security, specifically the Climate Security Programming Dashboard, which will be launched tomorrow. So I thank you for this. We turn to you for closing remarks, and we will equally applaud our distinguished panel at the same time. Please, Mr. Miliband.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a tremendous honour to be here, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's absolutely right that Nimo Hassan, on behalf of the Somalia NGO network, will conclude this landmark debate and this landmark session. I'm just going to say a few words about what I think comes out of the declaration. We don't need reminding, and certainly the people that we at the International Rescue Committee serve don't need reminding, that conflict and climate go together. 16 conflict-affected countries, all in the top 25% of climate vulnerability, represent 60% of global humanitarian need. They are living out the tragedy of the climate conflict interface today. What I think has come through this debate is that a declaration is great, but it only achieves something if the words are turned into action. Previous COPs have made other commitments about other subjects, and it's been way too slow to turn the words into action. We have to resolve today that the words of the declaration are turned into action in key areas. Action to make sure that risk mapping includes the communities affected at a granular and local level. Many good new initiatives on risk mapping. Let's talk to the people, let's bring them together. Secondly, absolutely vital that we innovate for climate adaptation in fragile and conflict states. That innovation needs to be anticipatory in its effects, but it also needs to get to grips with the tragedy of livelihoods being laid destitute by the climate crisis. Thirdly, no more fear of using civil society and working in partnership with civil society between the multilateral agencies and local civil society. It's civil society that has the reach where the mainstream system fails. And finally, let's have action to bring together climate finance with humanitarian finance. The separate stovepipes have been separate for far too long. Final word. Humanitarian action is the first step on the road to development. Reduce the suffering, start to make the improvement. Let us resolve that when we meet in a year's time, there are not just more signatories to the declaration, but the number of people suffering humanitarian need is going down, not up. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Please, the floor is yours for a final remark.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As a frontline humanitarian, as a Somali sister, as a friend, let me tell you, we, the Somali people, are coming to terms with the impact of concurrent droughts. 5 failed rainy seasons, now comes El Niño and the horrendous flooding. What I'm about to share is the reality of climate crisis. What stays with me is a day last year at an IDP camp in Kismayo. We heard of Obah, a 4-year-old daughter of Jawhara. Obah could not keep food down and was constantly ill. The next morning, she died. Her mother, Jawhara, said she will always remember her daughter as the happy little girl. A couple of days ago, I visited Baidawa and Beledweyne in south-central Somalia, two of the worst affected cities by the El Niño rains. The situation was deplorable. Hakima, a mother of 4 children, including 1 disabled, had sought refuge at the displaced people's camp due to conflict. Thrice, she's been displaced, this time not by drought, but by floods. The urgency could not be clearer: to do better, to act faster, to build resilience together. The launch of the COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace is a welcome step forward. Thank you to all those who endorsed it. We celebrate another historic moment at COP28, the decision to operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund with pledges. While we all celebrate these steps forward in decisions, we must take big leaps forward in delivery and turn this into action. I always hear about the issue of trust from a donor perspective, but trust is a two-way street. While change is being made on the ground by communities, local actors, and countries facing impact on climate change, trust needs to be also earned by delivering on commitments. There must be a mutual respect for change to happen. We need to ensure that the funding is accessible by the communities, local actors, so that they can make informed decisions. The funding needs to reach them fast so they can act before disasters. It needs to be flexible because our needs are not static. They change just like everything else in life, just like the climate is changing. The funding needs to be multi-year, long-term, be additional to humanitarian fund to ensure adaptation and development takes place, not at the cost of humanitarian needs. Funding must be grants so that people least contributing to the climate change do not pay for the actions of others. As David said, we need to take risks. Just because we're risk averse due to our own bureaucracies, rules and regulations and red tape does not mean that we need to kill the hopes of dreams of millions of others. The risk of inaction is far greater. We need to reach women like Hakima, who can ensure that her disabled child can have a better future and not fear every time it rains. We cannot have another child of Jawhara be taken away because of our inaction. The ball is in our court to act and play the fair and just game. Time is of the essence. Let us leap forward together. Thank you.
A word of appreciation, please, to our final speakers and to our distinguished panelists who are still here. And herein ends the launch of the COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace. Thank you, and thank you to all for those commitments.
Ladies and gentlemen, this means that this session is now over. The next session, Reaching the Last Mile, will begin at 2:30. Thank you.